we have gathered here today to lay Jeff Kaplan's Overwatch 1 to rest. Overwatch 2 is looming on the horizon, and I wanted to rank the 19 currently competitive maps. That's going to exclude arcade maps, that's going to exclude Lunar Colony and Paris. Obviously, like, control maps are going to be in it, and those are, essentially packs of 3 maps, so those packs of 3 are going to be on the list as packs of 3, but I will be ranking those 3 against each other individually. So let's start the list. Released in September 2017, we have number 19, what I believe to be the worst map currently in competitive rotation, Junkertown. This is an escort map that takes place in the Australian outback. The Overwatch dev team actually visited an abandoned ghost town for inspiration when designing this map, which I suppose is fine. I mean, the map isn't spooky, and I guess you could say it's abandoned. Obviously, it was developed with Roadhog and Junkrat's existing character designs in mind. I just think they should have used the Ghost Town money to fix the foundational problems with the map instead. The first section is so cramped for defense. I can't believe the optimal strategy is to get on this narrow, wooden stretch of platform and cover your nuts. Usually before defending in an escort game, there's a bit of excitement in the air, like it's, let's get in position and make this a full hold, make this full hold happen. Junkertown defense is more bracing for the inevitable pain that's coming. If your team is overwhelmed, it's either drop to the payload or do a single file march to the right behind the corner. The second section is too open. Ironically, the second section is one of the worst places to use Junkrat, which, let's be honest, I'm not really complaining too much about that. This section is better in theory than in practice. I mean, it really does feel like no man's land when you're out there without a payload for cover. Maybe narrow it down a little bit, take that cliff side and move it closer to the escort path. That might help things a little bit, but all in all, I am just not a huge fan of this section. Next, we actually enter the town portion of Junkertown. I really like the verticality, but the sightlines aren't very dynamic in this horseshoe turn. We'll see much better examples of this further into the list. The last push heads into a factory setting where the payload must be taken through yet another horseshoe turn with a large rotating bridge-like set piece in the middle. I think this is the best portion of the map. I'm a sucker for these dynamic set pieces, and this underside path is a great flanking tool. Junkertown is a low C tier map. Without this last section, it probably would be in D tier. Number 18, our first hybrid map, Blizzard World. Conceptually, such a cool map. A Six Flags-esque theme park encapsulating Blizzard's most popular IPs. This map blows its load a bit early in terms of map design, with a lot of interesting ways to approach and defend the capture point. The escort sections are where things start to fall apart. There's some verticality where defense can post up by the first choke, but it feels a bit too cramped to prove effective. Much better just posting up down the hill on the main path. This runway isn't terrible, just a bit messy and unfocused. Sections that are off the main path seem a bit too girthy. This cubby in the last escort push is way too close to the payload path to be effective. The bottomless pit here rarely sees much action. Still, not a lack of flanking opportunity, and I'll give props to the middle skywalk in the center of the map that tries to tie everything together, but ultimately it feels a bit tacked on. Number 17, Havana, an escort map released in May of 2019, is located in Cuba and begins in a fairly standard outdoor section where there's not too much to say about it, apart from some side cubbies for flanking, some health pickups, a sniper view, and this telephone booth that I always put way too much faith in protecting me. This leads into a semi-cramped indoor section that is just a poor man's Gibraltar hangar. We finish things off with a decently interesting outdoor section, not a lot of cover for offense walking up to it, but I enjoy playing the bridge choke point from both sides. A little boring, pretty safe map. Hopefully this isn't culturally insensitive to Cuba, but I feel like the aesthetic is kind of homogenous with a lot of the other Overwatch maps. City streets that lead into some sort of factory depot area. Likely they were just sticking to what they knew. So yeah, I'm perfectly fine sticking this in the middle of C tier. This goes for a lot of these mid to upper C tier maps, but I'm never upset when Rialto pops on the queue, nor am I super excited. Rialto's first choke reminds me of my grandfather's time spent in Normandy, action-packed and explosive right out of the gate. This is all solid. You got your water hazards, taking inspiration from Venice's canals, sniper posts, and the way too obvious solo or small squad flanker path. Halfway into the escort map is when this map begins to drip from its baking mold. I love that you can go on these boats, big Pixar Luca vibes, but unless you're pressing L shift as Olivia Colomar, you're gonna get spotted like Johnny Sins in the Vatican thanks to this offensive friendly stairwell that I actually really like. Unfortunately, there is just not a lot of incentive to fight off payload in the last half of the map due to all the right angles and lack of hazards. Usually the best strategy is to just go double shields and shoot more than the other team. 5 out of 8 pizza slices. Number 15, Hollywood. I'm not sure if this is a surprise or not to most people. I've played Overwatch with the same 4 to 6 people for 6 or so years, and sometimes I just feel like I'm in a bubble. If I'm ever on the Overwatch Reddit or something, people just never really spoke about Hollywood all that much. Back in the day, it was always people bitching about Volskaya or Roadhog's Galaxy Hook. Hollywood isn't a bad map by any means. I'm a little disappointed to see it this low on the list, but likely that's just because the other maps are so good. The capture point here has a lot of interesting designs, some risky high ground and some not risky high ground. You have this conveyor belt that just begs Torbjorn to lay his turret on its face. The escort portion has some solid choke point battlegrounds, and major props to the designers because I feel like all 3 lanes here are utilized effectively, and we have some crazy verticality where Soldier and Widow can tightrope walk. The last portion isn't bad. Now that the shield meta is a bit less prevalent, there are some exciting flanking opportunities on both sides. Numbami's pretty good. Attackers got 3 lanes to start. It's pretty hard to convince your team to take the left one, otherwise this might happen.
Double kill.
Among all the hybrid maps, I think it has a pretty solid control section. Defense has an elevation advantage here at the main choke, but need to be careful of this deck area that defense can take a staircase up to. But to compensate, on the other side, there's this nice wraparound upper deck. This control point is one of the more mosh pity control points. You only have the payload in the center for cover when, you're in the thick of it and attack is actually on the point. It definitely gets very hectic. I think there is enough cubby holes for defense to work around here in case they get too overwhelmed to compensate for how open of a point this is. Not to spoil the rest of this too much, but this probably is my favorite section of this map. It is definitely possible to full hold here. If my team's attacking here and we fail to even get a tick, I feel like it's much more our fault than the map's fault, relatively speaking, of course. The escort portion has some solid set pieces. I like the bus and the multiple options given to reach high ground. The trees here can hinder a sniper's line of sight. I just like the trees on this map in general, like the high-tech future city merging with the African nature, gives a nice mood. It kind of looks like that one picture you get when you Google Utopia that you see a lot in memes. For all I know, that could have been the basis of this whole map. Mechanically, in my experience, the escort section does feel like a bit of a slog compared to other escort sections. Perhaps because the map is filled with right angles. You got one there, there. Even when the teams are pretty evenly matched, I feel like this often leads to hopeless battles at the choke where defense isn't really aiming to win, they're just really trying to run down the clock. Maybe I'm just terrible at Numbani defense, but everything between capturing point A and the final choke just feels like foreplay. Despite that, I do get a kick out of Numbani, and I'm putting it at the very top of C tier. Probably could be a low B on a better day because I am a man of wavering standards. Gibraltar is the most Overwatchy Overwatch map. I see someone on the street with Overwatch socks, I'm thinking of Gibby. I recently found Blizzard does actually give this place a real location, like the other maps. I always thought it was supposed to be a secret for story and world building reasons, but mainly because the country flag they slap on the thumbnail when the map is loading is just the Overwatch logo. This map has the best spawn room in the game. It's not just a spaceship copy and pasted in. Offense has this awesome science room that Winston obviously spends a lot of time in with this tire swing and all this science stuff on a whiteboard. Hey, what can I say? I'm easy to please. The map itself is quite large, but feels smaller than it is thanks to consistent 3-lane design with every choke sectioned off so fights don't leak into the sidelines. The first payload turn has this giant cliff for defense, and someone on defense is always feeling confident enough to lock Widow, only to get bum rushed soon thereafter. The payload path takes this nice dip into the subterranean going back up to the hangar entrance, where parallel to that on the other side is this kind of breaker room which houses a Mega and usually a fight between Hog and the other team's squishies. It's also a good spot to put Ryan and have him charge into an unsuspecting team. You know, if you're feeling cheeky. The hangar area maintains the high platforms from before, this time with an actual ship acting as the main set piece. And what's great about it is it actually acts as part of the high ground. You can actually go inside and pick up a health pack there. This is my favorite section of the map. I think it best exemplifies the theory of being large and open, but also having these smaller compartmentalized sections. Mostly thanks to these storage containers that you can use as cover, but it's also pretty easy to get over them. The last push is definitely the weakest section. The side paths don't inspire a lot of creativity. Ask yourself, how confident do you feel when marching back to stop the payload from Gibraltar's final spawn compared to, say, Numbani or Eichenwald? I mean, it's all very relative to the situation, and you might not feel confident about any of those, but Gibby is the one that inspires the most hopelessness from me. So ultimately, I think it's a real shame that this final section fails for me, because everything before is A-tier stuff. Number 12, Busan. Busan? This is the first control map pack on the list. It was released in late 2018. Strongest of the three being Downtown. This map is a nice envisioning of an urban South Korean living district with apartments and shops sprinkled around. You even got this cow balloon that is impervious to bullets. I like how the point sits flat against a wall, providing some nice cover for healers, but there's no ceiling, so if you're feeling ballsy, you can just jump straight onto point. Nothing else really flashy or unique here. There is a giant cliff opposite of the city, and it's one of those where as long as you're cognizant of the cliff itself and of Roadhog's hook, it's probably not going to be much of an issue. Mecha Base. Really just a more sprawled out version of Downtown. Even looking at the map side by side, you can see that both have a sub-level point that you can jump onto, a cliff side that you probably won't fall off of, and some alternate paths on the point. Mecha Base's lower alternate paths do have some bottomless pits surrounding them, so something to be mindful of, but most fights are going to take place topside. This map is a lot more open than Downtown. There's not a lot of vertical walls, so that gives Farah a lot of mileage. Something unique about the cover on this map is that there are some blast shields on the point that will go up and down in some sort of cadence, which it can feel kind of random which team it favors. The shields are rather small for such a big point. It just feels like an odd addition and adds a bit of RNG to games that I can't say I'm a fan of. Also, one last note about Mecha Base, I feel like you could put this map into any pack and call it a day. I mean, I haven't been to South Korea, but how did South Korea inspire this map exactly? I mean, the wiki says Diva stores her mech here and she's from South Korea. You think she wouldn't need that much space? I don't know, maybe it like doubles as her training facility. Sanctuary is the weakest map in this lot. It feels like a fan-made map. In fact, there were rumors that Blizzard took inspiration from a fan-made Busan map, which, incidentally, was shown off only 2 months before Blizzard's official Busan hit the PTR. Which, no disrespect to the fan-made map, as it doesn't share the same layout as Blizzard's Sanctuary, but I remember hearing that rumor and feeling like this was one major dip in quality. Aesthetic-wise, it's gorgeous. A more traditional Asian setting in autumn with temples and a big gong. And that's mainly what I have an issue with, is the gong. The point is a donut, with the gong as the donut hole, which is not at all unique to this map. There's a ton of other control points which has this kind of same donut style. But the major difference is the cover and entry points. Lijiang Garden has 2 major entry points with an additional 2 harder to reach window entry points. When I'm on point there, I'm usually only concerned with what's on my half of the donut and the sight lines from the entry points. I feel like it's a great balance. You're not too exposed, but also far from safe. Sanctuary, you're far too exposed. I suppose you could make the argument that the ideal strategy is to spread your team thinner and block the entry points rather than being on point, but I mean, when in this game do you want to spread your team that thin? You just have these enormous sight lines, and you're just gonna get staggered. I am all for these open CP maps. I understand that homogenizing every CP map leads to other problems, but I think this one really needs some condensing and a rework in the center. This might be a slightly warm take, but I think adding 2 walls here and here around the gong would be a good start. TLDR, it's too big relative to how small and open the point is. Route 66 can be a grand old time. This is a pure escort map, the first escort section taking a windy detour around a gas station within this rocky canyon, opening up a lot in the next section that encircles a double-decker saloon with smaller surrounding buildings, and finally finishing with a more traditional 3-lane indoor section with some moving platforms for added flair. One of 66's strongest aspects is its tight design. I'm pretty bad at this game, so I do a lot of walking back and staggering. What I can say is my walk back is relatively short compared to a lot of other maps, thanks to the windy paths of the first 2 sections and generous cave shortcuts through the canyon. There's some decent boot potential at the first big choke and some smaller boot potential in the saloon section. We could have used some extra girth to these flanking paths, as these are the reasons you'll almost always see a Junkrat playing. Even the main choke on the last escort section, it gets a little bit too crowded when you got a payload right in there. You're just always going to have a Junkrat right there just tossing in bombs. Still, definitely one of the better escort maps, and you might even be able to throw a Bastion in your team comp.
Oh, Bastion straight right off the start.
Anubis has grown on me. It has aged like a fine wine, and my small monkey brain was just too smooth to appreciate it. Teamwork and traveling as a pack is important in every single aspect of this game, but never more so than on the assault maps, and Anubis is a prime example. The objective is stationary and usually jammed in a corner. Whatever assault map you're playing, the map provides the tools to defend and to penetrate that area. What's left up to the players is how well they can coordinate and click heads. Without this coordination, assault games can last a few minutes, and with, they can be exhilarating. Anubis's first point is standard fare with the flank path, main path, and the path everyone chooses first to walk up to the dinner plate defense is posted up on. If the initial first point fails, all of the other side paths are popular choices, so Junkrats and Reapers can usually flourish here. Plus, there are these arcs and aqueduct things Widows and Pharas can utilize with a lot of risk/reward. I think what's most polarizing about this map is the second point. It can feel really advantageous for defense, but I feel like shit can go south at like the drop of a hat. Definitely one of the more difficult points to take, and it's not as open in terms of the surrounding non-point areas like Volskaya and Hanamura have. Offensive hit scans usually have a lot of trouble finding solid high ground for early picks. Utilizing the left-hand flank with good coordination is commonly the way to go. What I believe makes this assault point stand out so much is how it awards aggression. Standing on the sidelines and trying to get a pick here and there to move in does not work nearly as well as just forming a giant death ball and going in. Also, shouts out to the cubby behind the point, aka the Lucio Safehouse. Coming in at number 9 is Oasis, aka Symmetra's Playground. This was the first new control map released in November of 2016. This was actually the same month as the Sombra release, and I just gotta say, this felt like the golden age of Overwatch. If there was any one portion of the timeline that I could say was the golden age, it'd probably be this one, was waiting for that Sombra release and seeing all those trailers. It was amazing. There wasn't a roll queue, Brigitte didn't exist, and I mean, most importantly, Daddy Jeff was at the helm. I think the reason we were so excited to get a new control map was because the ones we already had were so good already. While I think Oasis falls a bit short of the glory of the OGs, it still is a very solid pack. University being the strongest in my opinion. A standard fight pit with a non-lethal hole in the middle, also known as the Coward's Hole. Plenty of sightlines, low and high. Nice 3-lane design. I can dig it every time it pops up. Gardens adopts the donut design with this bridge and platform above. I feel the map is a bit too bloated on the side with the encircled mega, and some of that extra beef could have been placed on the flanking stair routes, but all in all, sign me up. City Center is appropriately the big Oasis map. I dig the insta-kill cars and the bounce pad. I wish these could have been incorporated a little closer to the point itself. I mean, honestly, like, if your team ever catches you jerking off around the car portion of the map, you're gonna get scolded to get back to the team. Gardens and City Center both hold the Oasis pick back a bit from the greatness that is the other control maps, but I wouldn't call either of them bad. Number 8 is the assault map Volskaya. Volskaya is like that friend who's a dick to you, but only because they ultimately want you to reach your potential. It's definitely one of the most competitive maps of the bunch. Like, the better team is always going to come out on top when playing Volskaya. The first point is very challenging to do a full hold and lends itself to a lot of different strategies on both sides. There are left and right standard flank paths, but they are within the defender's choke, so a shield or a quick dive is the best way to reach them. But there is another. On the attacker's far left is a not-so-sneaky third flank path that can be accessed with a Sim Teleport, Tracer, Pharah, or any other hero that can make this large gap leading directly to the point. Great for pulling back the defense. The second point is an absolute classic, a competitive choke, moving platforms, an elevator, intelligently placed megas, and a lot of sweat. This ain't your grandmother's second point. It definitely calls for coordination, which, hey, is the name of the game. Just getting a tick as offense can be fulfilling and maybe even the game. I feel like strategies can be a little bit more versatile here than, say, Anubis's second point. There are just so many more options as far as elevation and routes go. Also, props to Blizzard for not putting in any ice physics here. The Ilios maps are bright and beautiful, taking place in a Mediterranean town. Maybe not the most complex or purely competitive maps out there, but some of the most fun. I'm placing Well in the top spot for this pack. It's very close with Lighthouse, but Well accomplishes exactly what it's trying to. Its namesake is smack in the middle of the point, and all 12 players are cognizant of it, receding from it like Jeff Kaplan's hairline. I feel like other maps with bottomless pit hazards, save for maybe Lighthouse, aren't as outward about them. Like getting booped in Busan or King's Row can be a surprise sometimes. I love Well because it's so verbose about it. This does influence the hero pool. You'll likely see Hog, Lucio, Orisa, Pharah, which is to its detriment, but I wouldn't change anything about it. A good hook, a good boop can flip the game on its head and lead to some salty boys and girls. Lighthouse falls into the Rave Cave or Mosh Pit category of control maps. Fights typically don't last too long in there unless you have a Lucio or Zen ult pumping. Boops are in high demand here, depending on your SR. You're only ever in real danger of them though if you're not committed to the mosh pit, if you take the coward's way out down the stairs, or to the back deck where a Lucio or Pharah is sure to find you. Ruins is decent. Easily the weakest due to how strong the other two are. Maybe one of the few original CP maps Widow was viable on, as it's just a long straightaway with some Greek architecture that can be used for verticality and getting a sightline. Winston really seems to excel here due to how quickly he can jump over the architecture and still has a shield to ward off Widows and hit scans. Not a bad map, but I'm always hoping to get the other two first in rotation. The very last escort map on this list, Dorado. A colorful Mexican town. This is the actual phrase the development team searched on Google Images when trying to find an aesthetic for this map. Though they later discovered that the photo they used as a visual reference was actually of a town in Italy called Manarola, so you could say it also has an Italian inspiration. I always think of Dorado as one of the great pillars to the Overwatch map pool as the strongest pure escort map. It feels very balanced for offense and defense, and for all heroes. The map ebbs and flows from wide shopping areas to smaller corridors, with connecting paths alongside the payload path. Unlike Gibraltar, I think Dorado has a strong layout the entire way through. It's not uncommon to see a game end at any of these choke points, which is exemplary of strong map design. A team has more influence than the map itself on the outcome of a game. It might have one of the most unique first set of flank paths. The left path going underground and emerging in a courtyard in defender territory, and the right path leading up to a narrow bridge right in front of the defenders. Every section grants defense a generous amount of high ground that can be infiltrated by attacking with the less obvious path, which aren't as popular nowadays with all the flank characters, but still good to have for all the different team comps. Other than that, I don't have too much to say. Dorado has very few weaknesses, and I think it's held up extremely well through all the game's iterations. There's a lot of Hanamura hate out there. Maybe I had some disdain for this map back in the day before Horizon Lunar Colony and Junkertown were in the lineup. I won't lie, I get a little aroused when I hear that sweet Hanamura tune. So Hanamura is an assault map set in Japan with some traditional Japanese architecture mixed in with some modern Overwatch flair. The first point here is in a closed-off structure across a courtyard with a main gate and elevated opening. The typical offensive strategy for these assault maps is pretty standard across all SRs. Get an early pick or synchronize ults before snowballing your team through the main entrance. Hanamura's first point is one of the best, if not the best example of this philosophy. Defense needs to keep an eye on the top right window and has very solid sightlines out of main. And it is very possible to full hold if every single member is playing with minimal errors. But when one or two of the defending players slips up, which statistically probably will happen, offense is going to go gangbusters. It reminds me of those videos of a dinner bell being rung and like 50 dogs piling through a small opening. It's not impossible to ward off the masses on point as it's enclosed and has this big bell in the middle, but it's always a great feeling when you're on offense and your team is just storming through the courtyard. There's some added space outside of the point in case battles spill over. including a cliffside on the back that I've seen more than one Rhine suicide charge off. Overall, I'm a big fan of this point. Next is Hanamura's infamous second point. This enormous temple structure houses the point with 3 ways to enter. Main, the often used elevated side door, and for those of you with a little bit more hair on your balls, you have the side deck entrance, where most heroes are going to have to get a sim teleport to make it over. A common strategy is to storm the second point ASAP after capping the first to hopefully catch the defense with their pants down. If this doesn't work, all preceding attempts are done from the upper door. Going main is very challenging due to the deep line of sight the defense has, and in most cases is going to call for a shield. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like the mindset for entering this temple has changed since 2016. In the early days, main was the more popular path, with the majority of the team going that way and flankers utilizing the left and right paths, while defense stuck relatively close to the point. This caused games to feel a bit stale and boiled down to whether or not attackers could combine their ults correctly. Now that the upper path's choke is used as the preliminary battle site, I find myself enjoying Hanamura Point 2 much more as it turns into a game of chicken. Main now feels like a flank route, and sending a team member to dance on point for a little bit is going to tear defense away from up top, and it takes a relatively long time for defense to climb back up those stairs up to the door. I really enjoy the assault maps that encourage defense to play off point. Ultimately, that is the reason why Hanamura wins out over Anubis and Volskaya, despite those maps having their own strengths. Nepal, set in South Asia, the monastery where Zenyatta taught his pupil Genji. Number 4 might seem a bit high for this control map, but I think this pack of 3 is a bit more skewed than the others. Starting from the bottom this time, Village and Shrine are very close, both competent and unique maps in their own right. Village does slightly beat out Shrine though. I've had a lot more full hold Shrine games than Village games. Not surprising considering the actual Shrine's elevation. This is another donut point and one of the most chaotic of all of the control maps when it's contested. There is just enough space and visibility to feel like everyone has you in their line of sights, and the challenge boils down to having your team concentrate on a single target. Holding this point is another story, as the height advantage I mentioned earlier is significant, as well as the deep line of sight the holding team is going to have. Despite being number 3 in this pack, I still have a lot of fun on Shrine. The mosh pit around the donut hole can be exhilarating if your healers are present and keeping out of danger. Would recommend. Village is up next. I don't think Village is very divisive of a map. I would even call it a little boring, aesthetically and layout-wise, but it gets the job done. It's got some fair sightlines and flank routes. Maybe the biggest standout aspect is how enclosed the point is, with a very low ceiling that just begs Symmetra to layer turrets. I do like how they compensated this by opening up the sides that don't face the team spawns. They also have a roof on top of the point that you can get on top of. The large openings might even justify a Pharaoh-pick, but probably not. What the fuck are you thinking? Finally, we have Nepal's best map, Sanctum. Now, Sanctum's death pit makes Helios' well look like Bobby Kotick's manhood. Tiny and insignificant. Nothing gets my jollies off more than getting a Roadhog hook, Orisa pole, Lucio or Pharah boop into the massive pit. The pit is almost too dangerous being so large right next to the point, but that's why we got this big cubby next to it, that you can even enter from above and drop down to what is hopefully not Torbjorn, who just molten cored all over the floor. This map might be the sole reason why Nepal is so high. I could just gush about it all day. It might actually be my number 1, like if we were taking separate maps from the packs out, but unfortunately the other 2 do weigh it down a bit. Not that they are bad maps unto themselves. And I realize I've been praising the boop heavy maps a ton. I've known this about myself since I've started playing Overwatch. I've always loved the boop heavy maps, and I don't necessarily want every map to be a boop heavy map. I think the scarcity of them makes them refreshing. Like, it would be really frustrating if there was a giant pit, in every single map. Number 3, King's Row, a hybrid map in England. I know this is several others' number 1, and I think the reasoning behind that is this map truly feels like one of the most balanced maps in the game, excluding the control maps, obviously because those are symmetrical. It's the Goldilocks map. Not too big, not too small, all heroes are welcome, even you Torbjorn. That's not really so much of a hot take nowadays, but I come from a time where people were flogged for playing Torb. It's open and walled off where it needs to be, plenty of verticality for flyers, flank routes, and even some boot potential at the end. No one blames the map itself when playing King's Row, only their teammates. Some of my favorite Overwatch memories come from King's Row, and to this day it still sparks the biggest cheers in the Discord chat when the thumbnail pops. Unlike the other control entries on this list, the entire Lijiang package is fire. Not one stinker in here. It hurts me to put Garden at the bottom of the 3 maps because of how high the boot potential is, and it's a great donut control point map. The entire layout is designed around circles and circling circles, and I love it. Also a small thing, but I love the all-white room that looks into the point. It is a great, easy to recognize landmark that can be used as a point of reference for your teammates. Something that is kind of hard to do on these symmetrical maps. Obviously it overcomes this by being in the middle. That might seem like a moot point, but landmarks are so important in terms of communication. I'm not saying that other maps don't have landmarks and don't accomplish this, but it's like if you say white room, everyone knows white room. Also, the boot potential has a very similar energy to Ilios Lighthouse, whereas when you get off the point, when you run away, you are then in danger around that outer deck, and I love that. There is also the bridges that lead to the middle of the map where you can easily get booped off by like a Pharah or something. There is the path on the other side of the map that compensates for this, but you know, it's kind of the coward's way. Night Market has the best aesthetic of the bunch, and a layout including a simple square point with a cliff behind it. A cliff where you will find yourself only if something has gone terribly wrong. The point is large and there are multiple entryways, low and high. If you're attacking and headed into the main entrance, there is this foyer used as kind of a buffer for both teams. It really helps battles last as long as they should, with the right amount of intensity, letting both teams gather all their members rather than defense just bulldozing 2 attackers off the bat, even though that still does happen. Love myself some Market, but not as much as Control Center. Another circular themed map high up in an urban downtown. I feel like this map isn't very flashy when it comes to its layout and design, but it has such solid core principles that it works the best out of the 3. Okay, one standout aspect is the way too obvious High Noon McCree platform that overlooks the point and you have to climb up 2 flights of stairs to reach. McCree stopped using that platform to High Noon and used the lower one on the opposite side, and I feel just recently have started using the obvious one again, so I guess it's a nice mix-up. Also, Soldier uses it. Control Center has the perfect amount of visibility on point. It's more exposed than, say, a Night Market or an Ilios Lighthouse, so I wouldn't classify it as a mosh pit. Fights can definitely linger and transform into battles of attrition. At the same time, there are plenty of exit points and cover that can be utilized for a quick escape. These big monitor walls on the edge of the point and these walls further out that cover the doorway to the outer deck are massive when it comes to breaking sightlines. I do wish the outside deck was utilized a little bit more, maybe a bit bigger. I feel like it's pretty special though when you have a 1v1 or a 2v2 out there. No map is perfect, but this one is damn near. Number 1. Eichenwald, in a word, is brilliant. This is a hybrid map that was released September 1st, 2016, based in Germany, as the first new free-to-download map after the base game. And what a way to come out swinging. One of my favorite aspects is the untouched old Germanic castle aesthetic. Most other maps have a sort of factory tech look that is placed into a portion of the map to kind of differentiate it, if not the whole map itself. This style choice usually acts as a motif throughout these other maps to tie in the story of the Omnic Crisis. While Eichenwald does still hold this motif with the destroyed Bastion units you can find throughout the map, there isn't a forced emphasis on a particular section which allows the map to feel a bit more cohesive stylistically. Despite this, players are still able to differentiate between different sections of the map at a glance from a gameplay perspective. Also, as a huge Dark Souls / FromSoft fan, major shoutouts to the bonfire found in the castle. Eichenwald's capture point is set in this small residential area outside the castle and gives attackers plenty of options on how to approach. I mean, how cool is it that it is possible to vault that first row of buildings right outside of attacker spawn with like a Pharah or a ball, or even that crazy strategy where Mei puts an ice wall and Symmetra puts a teleport on top of that. I just love the freedom and that it's not invisible wall city up there. The escort section really shows this map's scale, going all out with the path wrapping around this large castle structure that can be used as a sniping perch and flanking route. The escort path is wide, and it really accounts for the payload actually being there and used as cover, which I think is an oversight on some other escort maps. The payload makes its way over a bridge with some decent boot potential, and for the first and only time, a Hail Mary save platform. Once the payload reaches the main castle, the offensive team is treated to a short little Lord of the Rings-esque battering ram animation which allows them to enter the castle from the main path, as well as providing a bit of cover. This last push in the interior of the castle is 2 90-degree turns akin to King's Row, with similar flanking routes and high ground on the side. The high ceiling will benefit flying heroes, and there is even this usable chandelier at the very end acting as the cherry on top for this fantastic map. I wouldn't say Eichenwald is the absolute most balanced or unique map in the game. I would say it's my number one aesthetically, but it does so well in every category and has minimal flaws, I feel safe in saying Blizzard will have a hard time topping this one in Overwatch 2. It was so important that Blizzard got these maps right when Overwatch originally came out. You have this fighting game roster of characters who can all traverse the maps in different ways. Some are long range, some are short range, some can fly, now some can roll. And it's actually incredible that the original maps, they still work for these new characters. Ball, he came out years after the game was released. I can still use Ball viably on a map that came out back when the game was originally released. It just goes to show how great of a foundation the original maps provided. So, that's why it's so important. I'm no expert. I haven't designed maps in a first-person shooter before. I did read a great blog post by Celia Wagar. It goes way more into the technicalities and the nitty-gritty. If you're interested, I've linked it in the description. Very solid read that I had right before making this video. As far as Overwatch 2 maps go, I have played all of them, not extensively. I played the beta back in like April-ish, I think, and I don't have too much to say about them. I really like that Canadian one. That one was pretty cool, but I don't have like hundreds of plays on them like I do in these Overwatch 1 maps, so I didn't feel comfortable including them in that, and I kind of wanted this to be its own condensed video of Overwatch 1, so we'll see. Here's to hoping that the future is bright. Tip your waitresses, stay safe out there, and peace out.